So Leo sets that as the idea, as a foundation for today's talk. The talk is about how Spirit works through us. One of the things that gets hinted at and expressly stated in that song is a central teaching of Earnest Holmes. Does anybody remember the symbol that comes with the science of mind? It's that circle. And, it gets divided and there's all that. We don't even need to go into all of those divisions to just see that there is that circle. And that circle is that there is all that is in and of and through God. So one of the things that's really important with this teaching, and one of the important things to remember, is the idea that Spirit works through us when we remember that radical idea that God is not something out there, that God is not some being that sits up in clouds and set this whole thing into motion aeons ago, or 4,622 years ago, according to some faith traditions, that there is a God and that there is everything else. And yet, so much of how people act sets that up. That God is like some master puppeteer. And that we are all just players on this board that God created. And that it's us, and there's, in a lot of religious traditions, there's Him. Him with a big capital H. The funny thing is that this very notion is what happens with the idea of mind. And as you may know, with this teaching called the science of mind, we often think of mind as somehow separate. I mean, has anyone ever said, that person must be out of their mind? What was in their mind? I can't get this out of my mind. How often do we identify with the mind as a singular expression? That our brain is doing what it does, and that doing what it does is the mind. That the thought processes that we have, that's our mind. How many of us have found ourselves in relationship, and we look at it later, we're like, what was I thinking? There's a whole song that, one of my favorite singers, Christine Lavin, does, which is, what was I thinking? What was I blind? When I dated this person, I must have been out of my mind. Yeah. We carry on that myth. We bring it from religion into just our daily experience. We think of our mind as this thing that belongs uniquely to me. My mind. I have the right to change my mind. Has anyone here ever been a little bit possessive of their mind and their mind's experiences? It's my mind and you can't make me change it. That's just how I am. That's just me. And if you can't love me for who I am, you just have to let me go. That notion of God and the rest gets re-imprinted and reimagined over and over and over again. One of the stories that I'm going to use to illustrate some of the points for today's talk about how Spirit works through us is the story of Wonder Woman, specifically as presented in the movie that was out most recently. Because in the story of Wonder Woman, it starts with this little girl who is she is going to do what she is going to do. The movie starts with her running away from her teacher. Because she is running to watch the Amazonian warriors battling and learning how to make it with each other. How to do what they're going to do, how they're going to fight, and how they're going to be victorious. And you see her up over watching it, and she's copying the moves that they're doing, and she's very good for a little girl. You're quite impressive. I mean, I wouldn't want to have to face her. her mother, the queen, is none too thrilled that Diana has gone and done this. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I know that there were definitely times that I did things that my parents were not altogether approving of. I'm seeing some nods, I'm hearing some affirmations.
Perfect angel.
That notion of there's a way to be and somebody is going to dictate it to us. And in Diana's case, there was a whole lot more than what she knew about. That was why her mother felt a certain way. Eventually, well, it wasn't really eventually in the film, but her main general decided, I will teach Diana, and I will show her how to defend herself. And you don't really know why the mom is so against this. But the general's like, she's going to have to do it. So there's this mystery. How many of ourselves find ourselves in a mystery? Things are happening, and we don't really understand why they're happening. Why is it that we create idols? Why is it? Because I think some of us are fearful of being part of this bigger picture. I think sometimes a mystery gives us the space to step away and to not be actively involved. Daniel Siegel is a psychiatrist, and he's done a number of works. He proposed that the mind is not only the psychological processes for ordering and making sense of things, but that mind is a shared experience. That we live together in a context of mind. Because in order to conclude something, in order to understand something, it's often happening within social constructs, within social situations. You know, we can make our mind up about something, and then we hit into a social situation where our mind changes to respond to that social situation. Again, I'm going to ask for you to think about it for a moment. Consider, when has your social relationship changed your mind? And that if you had just carried forward on your own internal perspective and hadn't expanded to a broader perspective, that your mind wouldn't be able to grasp as much. That the mind is bigger. In the story of Wonder Woman, Diana, princess of the Amazons, there's a turning point when this wonderful world where she lives, where all of this training is happening, where these warrior women are practicing and honing their skills, there's a juxtaposition where the world outside comes into contact with Diana's land. She sees through the sky. Somehow a plane crash lands into the water. And she goes and she saves Steve Trevor, I think it is.
Captain Kirk.
Captain Kirk in another, in another life. And what she discovers is that there's the Great War is going on. And they're trying to figure out what's he doing. He's dressed like these other guys, and these guys come forward. They follow him, and they come out with guns. And the Amazonians are armed with arrows and knives and swords.
Bracelets.
Well, only she's the one with the bracelets.
Yeah.
The rest of them don't have the bracelets. But these bullets end the lives of some of the Amazonians. And the queen doesn't want her Amazonians interacting with the world. She's like, there's enough stuff out there, and those people have made the decision to do that. How many times do we want to stay apart from the bad choices that others make? We see them. We're like, I'm not gonna step into that. I know better. And we also know that if we try to tell them what they should do right, how many of us have done that? You know, we're invited. You asked me what would make it better, and I'm just telling you. I can tell you any number of instances where my uninvited wisdom did not bring more light and more joy into the world. But I'm sure I'm the only one that no one else here has ever stepped into that kind of fray.
Right, you are.
So I acknowledge you and your wisdom for being able to hold on to those things yourself. This is where we come to the second notion is. So how Spirit works through us is we stop seeing Spirit as separate. We stop seeing our mind as separate. We see that it is all this huge field. It is the ground of being. It is that place from which all has and rises up and is. Rather than God or the divine or Spirit and me. We are within that. The mind is within one greater mind. Now in this science of mind teaching, one of the things that gets explored is the process of prayer. So one of the things about prayer is it's frequently, what is it we want? What do I want? I want a new car. So what would the new car bring us? So we kind of look at, well, what will come about from that thing that I want? And then we look to the God quality that's there. Do I want a car? So is that transportation? And do I want ease? What's related to it? And then we pray that divine quality, that ease that is moving all of the universe, that it functions and it flows and that it makes all of life move forward easily. And it's going to be moving me forward easily in my car. I'm going to be driving on, and I'm happy and I'm healthy and I'm well, and I'm so grateful for this experience. And I release it, and so it is. We get a lot of practice in this teaching about identifying what is it that we want, identifying what's behind it, and then letting that come through us. Right? The thing is that particular style of interacting is probably the most basic way that this religious practice, that this spiritual practice can move forward. It's a little bit like child development. Me, 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 me. What do I want? And I want it now. You know, training for a practitioner, you learn to ask others, what do you want? And you be in a place of listening for what the others want, and you share in that, and you figure out, you get to the root of it. The notion of how the Spirit can work through us is to shift it around and elevate it from what do I want? What's in it for me? But instead to ask, what wants me? That's what happens when that world out there, that great war, was exposed. Diana had been taught that the Amazonian women were there for the salvation, for the well-being of all the world. And she was hearing about this great, huge need. And she was asking, how can we stay outside of that? How can we let that go on and not respond? The story that she was told early on in her childhood was that the gods had inner battles. and that the god of war, Ares, had killed off a whole bunch of other people. And the god of war did it because he was not too pleased with the creation of humanity. That humanity was not the best and highest expression of the divine's creativity. And Ares was not about upholding and uplifting this. The story is really the same as the story that comes through with Lucifer. Lucifer was none too thrilled with humanity. It was like, I don't want to be the angel for them. Don't make me do that. That's the story. But it's a story that repeats itself. How many times do we want to be in that same place? We encounter people that we're like, I don't want to pray for that. I don't want to pray for that person. Again, I don't know about you, but there are some people, I will let it be nameless, but I think you all know who I'm talking about, that it's very difficult for me to hold that person in prayer. So in this story, this god of war has been, from the Amazonian's perspective, has all about unleashing the imperfections of humanity and letting humanity fight. And Diana learns that there is a weapon. It's called the God Killer. And she thinks it's this sword. So she gets ready and she steals the sword. And she is going to go into the world because she is going to find this god of war. What wants us? What wants us and calls us forward? For Diana, she heard that it was a whole world that was at war. So she sets off in pursuit of war. Now Steve does not take her directly to the god of war. That's what he's agreed to. That's why she will release him. And again, because he was dressed in the same German outfits that the other people who killed the Amazonians, they held him back. But the two of them escape on a boat, and they arrive in London. And she's a little upset because she had bargained that he was going to take her to the front, because she was going to find Ares, the god of war, and she was going to take him out. But they arrive in London. Foreshadowing. She goes to a conversation where all the men are talking. And at one point, a general says, well, we'll just send out the troops and we'll just keep fighting. And she comes forward and she's like, do you realize how cowardly you are? Where I come from, the generals treat themselves the same as everyone else. We don't separate ourselves. We don't think that this person is worth less than I am. We think that everyone is of equal value. In that question, in that story, what wants us? One of Diana's answers was that what wants us is a sense of equality. What wants us is a sense of equity. What wants us is a sense of this is where we all come from and this is where we are all going. Now when she challenges the general, they don't stand up and say, great notion. They don't say, I love that you're telling us that. That's exactly what we needed to hear. Thank you for sharing that. They're like, she's crazy. Get her out of here. What right does this woman have to be talking in this? How often do we find ourselves in situations where the system is none too receptive to the light that we may have to share? But Diana didn't just say, oh, they're not going to listen to me. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to stop and be civil and just listen. No. She decided that she was going to go to the front. She was going to find Ares. Now she ends up with a troop of people, and as they're going, one of the members of the troop says to Steve, she's crazy. There is no god of war. This is just a fool's errand. These are my words, they're not their words, but it's the notion. Do we ever find that when we respond to what is calling us forward, that others might look at us, turn their head a little bit, and think, what up? What's wrong with you? You do not seem to be adding the numbers correctly. They get to a point, they come to the front. They come to no man's land. And there, Diana learns that there is this city that has been overtaken. And she's like, well, we've got to go. We have to rescue the people there. And Steve and the others are like, no, it's no man's land. We've been fighting over this, and it's inch by inch. There's no way through this. Diana listens to what wants her. So she's got her little shawl on, and she takes the shawl off, and she's in her Wonder Woman, from the Amazonian outfit, and she just goes into the middle of the fighting. And she gets shot at, and bombs are blown at her, but she withstands it all. And as she's withstanding it all, others start to follow. And she breaks the town free. Now, for some people, this would have been a great ending to the movie. Because armistice is on its way. There's going to be talk about peace. She's pushed through this front. But that's not where the movie ends. See, she has concluded that the person that's in charge of the fighting, a German commander, must be the god of war. And the other thing that's going on is there is a woman doctor who has come up with this great poisonous gas, which just kills everything. It goes through masks and it goes through everything. Just metaphorically, how often do we feel that there is just something that we can't get through? Something that is absolutely going to kill us off. So, the idea is, can we find this general? They go to join a party that the general is hosting, and on the way there, they let her know, you can't go in because you can't be a spy. You can't do this stuff. And there's a viewing place being set up. And the plan is, what they do is they end up firing this gas on the town, and it's a test. And the gas takes out the town that they just rescued. And Deanna is torn apart by this. Here she went to this work. How often do we feel like we've done something, we've accomplished something, and then it's all for naught? We made this difference, and now we're not seeing any fruit from that difference. So sometimes it's that what wants me may not even seem right. We thought we've done what we're supposed to do, and things go wrong anyhow. In that reading that Mykal read, sometimes we find ourselves in situations where we just feel that how can the presence of Spirit be here in this space? But what's proposed in that reading is that in those very places, we have an opportunity for intimacy with the divine. We have opportunity for a communion that we might never have known if it hadn't been for that. How many of us have had the story of a person reviewing their life, and they're shown a series of footprints in the sand, and there's shared footprints, and then there's just a single set of footprints, and the person is complaining. It's like, look, I told you there were times that I felt completely alone. And the angel or the divine with whom this person is reviewing their life says, well, this is the time that I carried you. So what wants us? The final way to see how Spirit works through us is to reorder how we do things. How often do we simply think that we name what we want, we affirm it, we call it into being, we act for it, we step forward to that? What I'm going to propose is that we start by becoming still. And in that space of stillness, we create an opportunity to just listen. Now, I don't know about you, because I'm very much a person who's been a doer. So the notion of listening is not exactly a doer's first step. But the process of just getting still and listening. There's a prophetic text from the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew tradition, where the divine is showing up. And there's the sound of storms. But the prophet didn't come out then. There's the sound of fire, and the prophet didn't come out then. There's the sound of fighting, and the prophet didn't come out then. Only when it was still did the prophet come out, knowing that that's when the divine had shown up. The stillness in the story of Deanna is that she fights the general. And the arc of the movie is, you think that you're going to find out that this is Ares, this is the god of war. And he's just a person. He's a person who's taken some extra special drugs, so he's a little stronger and better than other persons. But the person who shows up is the guy that had been trying to propose peace. The guy from the council who had been arguing for peace. Now you think, how is it that this guy who's proposing peace is the god of war? He basically says, because people aren't going to be able to keep this peace. It's an impossible peace to keep. No one's going to be able to follow the terms of this armistice. And the god of war is able to pull the exploding world and bring all kinds of armor around himself and rearm himself and re-equip himself. It doesn't look good at this point in the movie, because the god of war has thrown her onto some pavement. This is after the Steve Trevor, and she's had a bit of a fight with him. She's not happy with his choices. She actually couldn't even hear the last things he said to her because there was a big explosion, and you know, when you have a big explosion, you don't hear clearly. So as she's sitting there, she is sitting there in the stillness, and in the stillness, she's able to recount and figure out what it was that Steve told her. Sometimes it's only in that space of stillness that we are able to hear a true message. And Steve's true message is that I know that I'm not the best person. I know that I'm not a great person, but this is just something I have to do. What he's doing is he's taking the gas and he's making sure that it explodes so far above that it can't come into contact and it can't hurt anybody. And she didn't know this because, again, there was this big loud explosion. She couldn't hear what he was saying, and she's like, what? What? But as she becomes still, she's able to piece together what it is that he's trying to say. And before he leaves her with two things. He leaves her with his timepiece. She never needed a timepiece before. Because in the land where she lived, there was no such thing as time. And he also left her with the words, I love you. In that place of stillness, when she recovers what he has said to her, a new wisdom comes forward. So the God of war is like, join me. Come on, we've got these lousy people. They're just killing each other off. Let's create a world anew. What she comes to realize is that she is not only the daughter of the Amazonian queen, she's another god. The God of war is saying, work with me. The two of us, we can recreate all of creation. Each one of us is a place of the divine. Each one of us is a place of immense power. And that's why I think the story of Diana Prince is an important story for us, because rather than simply being a daughter crafted out of clay with life breathed into it from the divine, Diana is the divine itself. And in the process, we thought the sword was the weapon, the god killer. We find out that it was Diana. Because what Ares tells her, the god of war tells her, is that only another god can kill a god. How often do we set up things, set up impossible scenarios, impossible situations? What are the gods that we have held up that we ourselves have to kill? I don't know about you, but I can consider gods of greed, gods of egotism, gods of selfishness, gods of righteousness, gods of self-aggrandizement. Aren't there all kinds of gods that we have breathed life into? How about the God of being right? Do we breathe our life into that? Or do we breathe our life into the God of love? So, towards the end, it's looking really rough for Diana. Ares asked her, why, what, they don't deserve it. And she recounts something that Steve had told her. It isn't about deserving. It's about making possible. It's about the beauty that may come forward. It's about the possibility. And how can we ever come up to or approach or encounter that possibility unless we take that time to be still and listen? In their final conversation, Steve was shouting at her because she couldn't hear. Have we ever found ourselves, I know I have found myself having the divine shout to me. And I didn't realize that it was even the divine that was doing the talking. I've told many of you the story that before my first transplant, I was just done with it. I hurt so much, and I had a very clear decision about how I was going to end my life, how I was going to end my suffering. Because I was tired of it. The sacrilege of it. I was like, Jesus Christ only had to sit on a cross for 3 or 4 hours. And then he died. That was not a long time of suffering. I have had months and months and months of suffering. I'm over it. I'm done with it. Next day I got that phone call early in the morning. Hey, we have a perfect match transplant for you. Can you get here? Yeah. Yeah. And again, I think I've talked with a couple of you about it. I caught a plane. 2 hours later, the airport was shut down because the snowfall was so heavy. There was no getting out of Seattle. So had that call come a little bit later, had it come a little bit different, in my mind, that was God shouting at me.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to come to the end of our rope before we can listen. The idea of it takes a 2x4, the universe is going to whack us with a 2x4. And we may think, well, why do I need that? Well, sometimes you aren't like it, but I am. Sometimes I just needed that 2x4 whack on the head because there was nothing that was going to make me listen. So to recount, how is it that Spirit works through us? We recognize that Spirit is within us. That there is not this puppet master, that there is not this us and them, there is not this God and me. There is one life, one power, one presence, and it is right here. So I ask you, each of you, to consider somewhere in your life this week where you can recognize that the divine is in you, is in a situation that you're encountering, is in another person. Just open yourself to the possibility of seeing that. And when you notice it, just acknowledge it. Simply say yes to it. Simply say, I am witness to this. I am experiencing this. I am encountering this. Fancy word for this is that experience of the numinous. That experience of knowing the presence of the divine. And I just ask for you to notice it, because sometimes what can happen is we can have an experience of the divine, and we go back up to the same seat, and we wait for it to happen again, and it doesn't happen. And we're like, oh, was that real or not? Then it's like you're scared away because you've now idolized that very experience, and you treat it as something that is going to happen again, or something that you can call on command. The divine, the experience of the numinous, I'm looking for it right here, right now. Make ourselves open, make ourselves available to us. Second one, remember, it's the what wants us. We can spend lots of time thinking about what we want. But look at the situation, look at the world where we are in, and what is it calling forth from us? What is it calling us to be? What is it calling us to do? What is it calling that is different? And just pay attention. How do we want to respond to it? I don't like that. It may be that. It may be, oh wow, this is amazing. It may be that. But again, just as we look for that experience of the oneness with the divine, looking for the what is being called from me. And then finally, that entering stillness and listening. Just pay attention to the customary way of being and moving through the world. I know I start my day with a to-do list. Maybe nobody else does, or maybe everybody else does. But there's a to-do list, and the to-do list, what's kind of significant about the to-do list? It's the do. Has anybody woken up and they start their to-be list? So my invitation is, create your to-be list. Because to create a to-be list is to enter into a space of listening. It's to enter into a space of stillness. What is it that we want to be on this day? So the third piece of homework is come up with a to-be list. And Mykal talked about it, that people would ask him what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he's like, I want to be happy. Our to-be list can be happy. It can be joyful. It can be thoughtful. It can be kind. It can be gentle. It can be loving. Our to-be list can be all kinds of ways of embodying life. In the movie, Deanna defeats the god of war not by acting with vengeance. I mean, he really tempts her into it. The woman who's come up with this magical poisonous substance that can eat through anything, she's got this tank and she could just crush this wretched woman who is like the inventor of just bad stuff. But she doesn't do that. And he, the god of war, calls out all of this lightning and just zaps her with it. And she just reflects it back to him. It's not that she deliberately, it's not like she calls forth lightning and says, I'm going to kill you. That's not what she does. She was being a place of space for which new things are possible. She was being a place where she let go of expectations around deserving. Where possibilities could happen. So, thank you very much. Leo is going to cap today's talk with a song that will... actually, before he caps it off, I'm going to invite you to join me in this affirmation to say together. So, I say yes, and then step aside and listen. I allow my intuitive nature to align with the perfection and wholeness of spirit as I allow a great vision of my life to come into view. And one more time to solidify that. I say yes, and I step aside and listen. I allow my intuitive nature to align with the perfection and wholeness of spirit as I allow a great vision of my life to come into view. And so it is.
I think one more time.